So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the difference between inspiration and ripping off someone else's work. And I was going to make this video anyways, but today I was browsing Reddit and I saw there's this post here basically saying, my boss isn't interested in original designs and insists we steal from Pinterest. This person also happens to have a really great username. But anyways, the basic text here is, I'm a graphic designer that works on merchandise and my boss prefers that we make parody products or rip off unknown artists. Most of our stuff is noticeably unoriginal and recognized as the original source, if not completely unchanged. I don't enjoy this and think it's wrong. What can I do? Notify the original artists or companies? So this is something that's actually a really big issue in the design industry as a whole, and it's very common to have happen to you as a designer, especially if you're a newer designer or working at a design shop that focuses really heavily on quantity. Because it's a problem that really starts to become more apparent to you when you're put under some crazy deadlines and expected to churn out work at a rate that simply isn't sustainable, or in some cases just not possible, at least not if you want to do anywhere remotely near good work with what you're doing. So I have a few different examples here to talk about and kind of explain how people might come to these conclusions and try my best to outline not only what is right and wrong, but also outline how that happens, because it can become a gray area and it's important that you as a designer are able to recognize when this stuff is happening and what you can do to try to stop it from happening, or perhaps put a different spin on it, change the work up enough, all that fun stuff. So right here I have an illustration done by Ollie Moss, and this might look familiar if you're familiar with the game Firewatch, but even if you haven't seen this particular graphic before, odds are you've seen a lot of people mimicking this style, mimicking this overall color palette, a generic forest in the background with the sunset colors in the background here. A ton of people have emulated this style in a way that is at best inspired by it, and at the worst is just ripping off this design in general. And I'm not saying that the idea of a silhouetted forest is maybe the most unique or perhaps original thing you could possibly do, but once you get too many elements in here working together, like the forest, the way they're kind of tiered out like this, the exact color palette, then you start treading on some pretty dangerous waters. So to show you the next example is someone who just blatantly ripped this design off. So here is a promotion from a Ford dealership, and this is an individual Ford dealership, not Ford, the huge company. So it isn't really Ford's problem as much as this individual dealership's problem. But as you can see, they just straight up ripped off the design. And this is a very clear-cut example of this is totally wrong and you cannot do this. Just to go back to the original design right here, you can see this is the main layout and that this is the layout that Ford dealership came up with. It's an exact clone, it's an exact copy. And you can also see that overall this was ripped off pretty well, if you can really say something like that. Like the text seems to fit the overall vibe of what's going on here. They trailed it down in a way that is sensical. So I don't feel like I can say the person who did this was just completely like not a designer, not experienced. They knew what they were doing and they likely knew what they were doing was totally wrong. So that brings up the question of, if this person is good enough to set this page up, use fonts and whatnot, and lay it out in a way that makes sense, how does this happen? And in general, how this happens is when you get some crazy, unrealistic time demand placed on you as a designer. Like let's say someone gave this person an hour to come up with an original design, mock up this page and ship it out, which happens quite a lot in the design industry depending on where you're working. Although no matter where I've worked, time has always been an issue. I just think that's part of what goes with the business. But it's very likely that either this person had a crazy time restraint placed on their work where they had to just steal some graphic in order to make it fit in that time, or this person was presented with a graphic, either knowingly or unknowingly having it being stolen from some other source. Sometimes as a designer, someone will just give you a graphic and be like, hey, I own this graphic. This is my graphic. I want to use it in a design. And you're kind of put to the test to either trust them at their word or figure out if they actually do own that design or illustration. That particular thing happens a lot, and that's really hard to know whether or not the person is telling the truth. Often you have to just trust that person. Like let's say they hand you a logo mockup that someone else did, but they never paid for that logo mockup, and then they give it to you and they're like, hey, this is our logo. We just want to touch it up a bit and finalize it. How would you be able to effectively realize that that mockup that someone else privately gave this person doesn't belong to the person that gave it to you? It's a really gray area and it's really hard to figure out how to effectively deal with that. And that's just something that'll always be difficult. So when someone else gives you something and claims it's theirs, do your best to figure out if that is actually that person's, if they have any kind of story that makes sense in terms of how they got it, or if it's something you should perhaps question. If you really trust the client, that isn't something that you have to worry about. And along those same lines, sometimes someone will just give you an image that they'll say they bought off of a stock image site, something like that. Although this particular graphic is incredibly well done, as you can see, it wouldn't blow my mind if someone told me like, hey, this is a stock image I found on a stock image site. At least if I didn't have the context of knowing who did it and what it was for, which I happened to have when I saw this. I think someone on Reddit actually posted up the comparison. I saw it on Twitter from the developers and the artist himself. But that's just some general context of how stuff like this can happen and things that you have to be aware about and think about when someone gives you other people's assets and claims that they have full freedom to use them however they want. In this case, the Ford Freedom event seems to be oddly fitting because they use this as if they had freedom to do so, and they absolutely did not. I don't know what came of whatever case developed off of this illegal usage. It might have been as simple as a cease and desist. But I do know that both the original illustrator, Ollie Moss, was aware of it, as well as the rest of the team from the game Firewatch were aware of it, and none of them were too happy that it happened, although I'm sure that it drove at least some promotion their way because of the general attention that it gained. So I guess that's at least one potential positive to this whole thing. And I did want to bring this particular example up because Ollie Moss is a great example of someone who's not only ridiculously talented, he's a great combination illustrator, designer, 3D illustrator. It's kind of ridiculous how good this guy is, but he's really good at pulling inspiration in a way that doesn't steal from the original work, but instead just puts his own spin on it and makes it something original. So I'm going to put this post back to normal size here and check out these posters. So for the game Firewatch, Ollie Moss made these 3 different posters as a limited screen print in order to both promote the game. These posters are, I think, inside the game on the walls of some of the buildings in the game. I'm not sure. I haven't played through the game myself, but I'm pretty sure I remember seeing these on a wall inside the Firewatch tower when I watched someone else play it. So as you can tell, these are super well done posters that give a bit of a vintage vibe, but still look modern when you look at them, and it also shows really strongly just how good of an illustrator Ollie Moss is. So these posters and this style is actually a very well documented style from America's national parks. They had a large campaign of posters in order to promote the parks. The one that stands out most to me is Yellowstone. So these were heavily inspired by those posters, but are in no way a ripoff, not even close to ripoff, because he did a great job of putting his own spin on this. But I have some of these posters here for you just to check out so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So things to take a look at here are the muted palette of the colors used, the painterly illustration style, which if you compare this to this, you can start to see some similarities in terms of the overall styles and the execution of those styles that were made. And I'll just keep going through a few different examples here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So if you compare this image of this poster that I think is a really great poster in its own right, although it looks and feels very dated now, compare that to what Ollie did, and I'll find the one with the deer because I think that's a really close and good comparison between these two. What Ollie did is completely inspired by these posters. It made me think of these posters immediately when I saw his original work, but at the same time, his work is definitely his own. It's completely new content. It has an original spin on it that just makes these feel much more modern than these posters that I think are from like the 20s, 30s, or 40s. I don't remember when exactly these were made. But comparing the two, you can tell that this one right here is much more modern. And in this case, I actually prefer the ones that Ollie did. I think they're just incredibly well done. But that's a great example of inspiration and not theft or a ripoff, because this is a completely original work here, and it's inspired by, it takes elements from, and it is really informed by some of the choices in these posters, but in no way did it just steal design assets from them. It wasn't just minor reworks or tweaks to existing work. It was a completely new and awesome thing. And that's the way that you should totally do it. If you have to use someone else's work as an inspiration point, which is actually a good thing, you should use other people's work as a starting point, perhaps as an inspiration point for things that work well together, color palettes, that kind of stuff. But it should ultimately be your work and not just a ripoff or a recombination of elements from someone else's designs. So I have just one more example here, and it's from a really large company, and it's also a bit more difficult than this one to this one because this is such blatant theft. There's absolutely no defending it. You cannot defend the fact that this Ford dealership just ripped this work off. It happened, and that's really that. This one is a little bit more complex, at least with some of them, but the whole context here makes it a complete ripoff. But basically, there's an artist named Tuesday Basin, or Basin, I'm not sure how to say her name, that had a ton of her work knocked off by a company called Zara. And Zara's defense for this is what really made a lot of people mad, because large companies like Zara stealing individual artists or illustrators' work isn't that uncommon. It happens quite a lot. Oftentimes, these companies will hire design companies who will then in turn place those crazy restrictions on time onto their designers, who are then forced to kick out work really fast, which means they have to essentially steal the ideas to make it happen. So Zara's argument here is the lack of distinctiveness of your client's purported designs makes it very hard to see how a significant part of the population anywhere in the world would associate the signs with Tuesday Bassin. And that sounds like one of the most dicky things you could possibly say to someone. Like, no one's going to know that your artist made this work, and therefore what they did is irrelevant. And the thing is that this is an actual legal defense to some extent. Like, what Zara was saying isn't just complete arrogant craziness. Essentially, when it comes to design and illustration and protecting your design and illustration, is that your work has to be unique enough, it has to be identifiable enough as being yours and not just some generic element in order for you to protect it. So for example, if I drew a really cool triangle, and then I saw someone else also use a triangle in their design, I couldn't tell them to cease and desist using that triangle because triangles were my thing and no one else can use triangles. Triangles as a thing are way too generic for me to protect. They're way too generic for anyone to protect. And because of that, everyone who wants to use a triangle can use a triangle. So in some of these examples, you look at this like a heart-shaped lollipop. And it's pretty darn clear as you look through all of these examples that this was a blatant theft of this person's, or at least knockoff. I think knockoff is a great word for it, of this person's work. But as an element, a heart-shaped lollipop or sucker is just not that unique of a thing. So that's where Zara's legal defense sort of comes into play here. But once you see the fact that they took all of her work and knocked it all off very closely, it becomes much more clear that this isn't an isolated incident. If this just, for example, just this heart-shaped lollipop was the only thing they took, it might have been just a coincidence, something that happened. But there's way too many of these for that to be the case. And in this case, Tuesday has a much stronger case against Zara because it was such a blatant copy of entire concepts that were already established. And some of these too that become even more tricky are something like this Keep Out little diary or book right here, where the Zara knockoff of this Keep Out is a different illustration. It says different stuff on the cover. It uses different colors. So any one of those differences wouldn't really be enough to protect Zara in this case, but all of them put together do make this, figuratively speaking, a unique illustration as opposed to this one. So once again, if this was the only one that they knocked off, they'd be in a much better place. But because they ripped off so many of these different ideas, it becomes extraordinarily difficult for Zara to defend what they did. And I've literally worked at places that worked for places like Zara, like an Urban Outfitters, both of whom are known for just stealing other people's work. And like I said before, how that happens is you'll get a stack of designs. They'll provide you with references about how they want that style to look, how they want that artwork to look. And if you aren't super, super close, your business is not going to get the work. They'll just pass you off for someone else because largely, for the most part, these places work on spec or speculative design work in that your agency or the place that you work won't get paid unless they accept the designs and push them through. So if you waste your time making designs that don't knock off the stuff closely enough to appease that particular business, it's no big deal to that business because they'll just use the other vendor who they were also not paying to do the work at the same time in order to use their designs that more closely fit their needs. And you might be thinking, well, that's a terrible business model. And it absolutely is a terrible business model. You don't generally want to work for places that do design work on spec or will accept offers from places that are trying to do stuff like this in terms of just knocking off other people's work, taking that person's style and just using it for their mass market commercial gain. But if you're working somewhere and that's your sole source of income and you're being told like this is what you must do in order to keep working here, that choice becomes a little bit more unclear. It becomes a little bit more difficult as to what you should do. If you don't have the money to just up and leave that job, or if it makes you too afraid to really stand up for yourself in order to make sure that you're not just stealing other designers' work, that's not a great spot to be in. It's not a spot that you should have to be placed in under any circumstances. but it certainly isn't all that uncommon, at least not in really large scale. If you've worked at a bunch of different design places throughout your career, you've probably had it happen to you at least once. And if not, you're pretty lucky to not have to deal with that. But I just want to let you know, it's not completely uncommon for what might seem like wild requests like this to be made, because often the people that are making those requests or asking you to do those requests don't have a full understanding of the law or simply don't care. They're just focused on the money, and that's where they're going to stick. So back to this original thread here, where this person is basically asking, what can I do? Should I notify the original artists and companies? That's certainly something that you can do. You can let those people know, hey, I just happen to notice this random company that I'm not affiliated with happens to be stealing all of your designs. You should probably check this out and use legal action if you can. That is certainly one way to go about it. I would say that if you work somewhere that won't let you change stuff up enough, if they won't let you make the work at least somewhat unique, you should look into leaving there, because that's not a good long-term place of employment under any circumstance. I would say, though, do your very best to let them know, hey, this isn't cool, but we could change it up in these ways to make it enough our own to make it okay to do, to make it something that is all right. And the difference between someone who's good is that the person who is good that you're working for will listen to you and be like, oh, I totally didn't know that this is a thing. I'm sorry. I wouldn't have asked you to do this if I had known that. So feel free to do what you think is the right thing here. That is the kind of person that you ideally want to be working for. Even though it's not great that they put you in that position to begin with, at least they're willing to listen to you and work with you in order to make sure it's done right. If that person that you're doing it for staunchly defends their stance and is unwilling to listen to you, and is basically if you want your job, this is what you're going to do, that is certainly not the kind of person you want to be looking for. So you'll have to make the call about what is best for you in the moment, whether you do the work and just notify that person so you can keep paying all your bills until you find a different job. That's not a great spot for you to be in, but ultimately each situation is unique and you have to make the right call for you in that moment. But certainly be aware that in terms of a long-term career move, those people are not people you want to work with, and they will severely limit your career if you stick around with them for too long. So do your very best to get out of that situation to somewhere better as soon as you can. But that's really all of my thoughts for this video. You can certainly let me know your thoughts in the comments section for this video if this has ever happened to you, or just what you think about it in general. I think that'd be really cool to get some different perspectives on it. And also in the description, I'm going to leave a link to a podcast made by two lawyers. In this case, the podcast is about two video games being extraordinarily similar to each other and the legalities behind that. But they talk about the differences between trademark and copyright and talk about how it is a confusing thing. There's a lot of gray areas, and they do, since they're actually lawyers, I should say, they know so much more about the subject than I do. They have a much better or well-educated opinion on the subject of copyright and trademark than I do. I'd suggest if you really like deep diving and nerding out on stuff like this, that you give that a listen. But if not, I totally understand not everyone is as weird as me when it comes to wanting to learn about everything. But if that is you, I'd recommend checking it out. It was super informational for me to listen to and gave me more perspective on the subject. But I do hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, feel free to hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to see stuff like this every week, please subscribe. I do my best to keep creating content just like this, as well as stuff like tutorials and other informational videos every week. Thanks so much for watching.